From there, we spent the rest of the evening coming up with rules for Ballyball, an official list of things that could and could not be done. If we have pads, we could include biting, Boatswain suggested. Biting humans is how we got to this point. Plus, that seems contradictory to the whole notion of peace. Besides that, we need to test out how well this works on the whole before we start including things that could cause injury. Humans would need all new armor on their necks just to be safe. My bite strength is the equivalent of one of their lions. A modified space marine with training? I snorted and shook my head. I did a comparison while I was bored during the trip here. Your bite strength is greater than 6,000 psi. Every eye turned toward the Dlamison security officer. I can't prove it now, of course, but I swear he sat a little taller in his chair. A strong bite is a point of pride for a Dlamisa, and when he saw Byron nod, Bosun opened his mouth to show off his teeth. Unlike mine, his teeth were capped with a titanium tip, and his were significantly larger than mine. He flexed his upper body, and his neck visibly bulged while he showed off, I explained. Our ancestors would chase prey, stab with our forefingers to hook into the flesh, and then our teeth would latch on. After that, we would shake the prey using our neck muscles to shred the flesh further. Aside from humans, we're the only known species that can track prey all day, though we do need to stop to drink unless we have something to help with that. Bosun snapped his jaws shut several times in rapid succession, drawing some impressed whispers and Rebecca's intense curiosity. "So how do you get a bite strength like that?" she asked. She set down the spoon she was using to feed her son and approached Bosun. She leaned at the hip so that she was facing his jaw. Military Dlamisa are so large that even seated, she was eye level while standing up, and had to lean to the side to look under his jaw. Her hair tumbled long and loose, swaying in the breeze that passed through the open window. She smelled faintly of coconut, and seemed utterly fearless. Perhaps some will not find this strange, but I would remind anyone who does that the galaxy is populated predominantly with evolved prey species, and out of those that did evolve from predators, apex or otherwise, Dlamisa were the most widely feared. Our predatory bodies, mine being something of an exception, always appear aggressive to more timid species. Getting up close to one of us is not something lightly done. Every instinct in the body of a prey species warns them not to come too close. Even many predators naturally stand away. But here, humans are magnificent in their utter fearlessness. True, one may make light of her coming close by way of saying she was using her reason and trusting to her personal knowledge of myself and our resident guard, but I point out that reason does not eliminate instinct, and there was no evident struggle over whether she should approach. No hint of instinctive fear of my enormous mountain of muscle and dark fur. "May I?" she asked, her hands coming up, and after a glance down at me and a whack of my tail against his, Bosun lowered his head a little and let her work. Rebecca brought her hands up and touched the underside of his jawline with the pads of her fingers. She let out an appreciative whistle as her fingers inspected Long Jaw. "What?" Byron asked, a note of rare intellectual curiosity in his voice. "My boy hear that impressive?" "Yes," Rebecca answered. "Good God, I've never seen a structure like this. In most species, the jaws are connected only at the base, near the back. But in our friend here?" She straightened up and began following the muscle lines all over his snout. "No, muscles run from front to back as well as at the base, almost like a drawbridge. The way it coils from point to point is totally alien to this world and any species I've ever seen. A bite like this will go through bone like butter." She gave another appreciative whistle and began reflexively scratching the top of Bosun's head. His tail wagged at the praise, and he began tapping one foot on the ground, his tongue lolling out in happiness. Praise for our bite is one of the highest praises you can offer one of our kind. I dare say he has the strongest single bite on our planet, at least 20% greater than a Nile crocodile, she added, and if Bosun's wagging tail hit mine any harder after that, I think mine would have flown off. Heh. I knew those chompers were strong, but not that strong. Byron looked up, and Bosun reflexively opened his mouth to show them off again. "But that's my boy for you. Strong like bull, bite like gator." He nudged Boatswain in the ribs, and though I didn't get it, I gathered there was a backstory there to some conversation I hadn't been party to. "So, biting is definitely off the table for the rules of the game," I reiterated, and Boatswain reluctantly nodded. "Damn, I like biting." He reflected. "Me too, buddy, me too." William answered, and his wife gave him a dirty look which I can only describe as a long suffering. though I was not quite sure why. So how does a species get a bite like that? If what Bailey says is right, even he's got a bite like a lion. Is that natural? Fauve asked. I winced a little inside at the way she said it. Jaw strength, after all, is key to our culture, and the strength of the bite in male or female is a strong predictor of whether or not one will mate with the other. Fauve might not have meant to say I would never find a mate, but it was quite the implication. Still, it was an innocent question, so I answered accordingly. Most of it, I said. He's had some enhancement, genetic modifications primarily. However, that only enhances his already considerable strength. To be with embassy security, he had to have a minimum bite strength of 4,000 psi. Boatswain clearly didn't mind the praise, and added in, I can bite clean through a Zenti shell and spit it out, no problem. So again, just to be clear, no biting. Not until someone has come up with suitable safety gear at least, I reiterated, and the table was filled with sage nods. Other rules were easy, with the field's white line boxing everyone in. 1 human thrower per Dlamisa, 1 Dlamisa per thrower. The Dlamisa could only carry 2 balls at a time, his own +1 stolen from one opponent. The farther the throw, the more points the throw is worth, with 1 point for every 3 meters. If he stole a ball, then the points were based on the farther throw, effectively doubling the value of the long-distance throw, even if they got a ball that was thrown only a short way. Tackles were permitted, punches and kicks were not. Disrupting throws were permitted. And so the rules continued. Little by little the game evolved, up to and including how the throwers could intervene with returning Dlamacin retrievers, as well as how many balls could be thrown in a match, and how they would be held after retrieval. Then, just like that, I think William said it best. There's nothing left to add, and there's nothing to take away. That means Ballyball is perfect. You know, I realize this is for science, but it honestly does sound like it might be fun to watch. Could we maybe invite a few people? Rebecca suggested. I felt multiple eyes on me from all directions but the wall. It seemed to run counter to the spirit of the observational study, but then, maybe? I could include one more variable as well. Yes, sure. What's just a few people? I asked. I'll probably have to have the captain there anyway, and I'll have to have the crew there as well to see who is willing to volunteer. So what's a few humans watching for fun? And just like that, I asked the dumbest question of my entire life. A few days later, I was at the park, mid-air, grabbing the tennis ball before I realized that I was going to land in the water. I recalled a human saying, "Look before you leap." I had enough time to realize the wisdom of this expression, just not enough time to save myself. I did catch the thing in my mouth. It's a funny thing my species still does, a holdover from our predatory days. Even though we have hands that allow the manipulation of tools and can grab with almost the same strength as a full-grown human, they do have a greater grip strength. We still instinctively grab things with our mouths if we're not thinking about it. And the lure of the ball was far, far too great. So I, in my unthinking state, grabbed it with my jaws and came crashing down into the water below. My fur at least had an oily undercoat. My particular variety of Dlamisa was very good with water, and as such, even if I didn't have the fans to help, I would drip dry if given time. I heard my human laughing while I swam to shore. Fauve was dressed in jean shorts that have been popular on Earth for centuries. It was hardy, durable clothing and as such barely changed over time. Much like shoe design, there comes a point where maximum efficiency, durability, and performance are achieved, after which improvements are mere tweaks to the existing form. She also wore a loose-fitting, short-sleeve shirt, emblazoned with the artistic stylization of a demon princess from her favorite anime adaptation of the novel series How Misunderstandings Made a Demon Lord. She had particular, even peculiar tastes, my human. The character in question was as far from Fauve's personality as could be. Fauve was an introvert, and seldom had any real interest in leaving her home by non-electronic means. Though not fearful of travel, it had no interest to her. She lived more in her own mind than any other human I knew, including her parents. But the character in question was the demoness Lamashi, whose story had her actually running away from her home in the castle of the Demon Lord and becoming a pirate. Strangely enough, the story came full circle with her returning to her father and to her responsibilities, but her adventurous and outgoing nature carried her far away for a good long time. As I swam to shore, I saw her laughter stop, and she turned her attention to my datapad, which sat on a park bench near the water. "Bailey, you've got an incoming message. It reads urgent. You might want to look at this," she called out, and I pushed myself to my feet and began to race up toward where she stood, water flying about as I shook off what I could, splashing her in the process. "Yeah, I had that coming," she said as she wiped her face free of most of the water that struck it. She snorted, and I picked up the datapad. She was right. I opened up the device and saw a priority message pop up. My jaw dropped, but no words emerged. "Well?" Fauve asked, as the ball rolled out of my mouth, bounced off the screen, against my body, and then down to the ground where it came to a stop at her feet. She crouched down and picked it up. "What's up?" "They're here! Are they insane?" I almost shouted my disbelief. "What? Who's here? Are we in danger?" Fauve asked. Her face looked like it was going to drain itself of blood for a moment, going as pale as a vampire's. "No. Not unless you're prone to heart attacks," I said when I found my voice again. "The merchant vessel." I knew their captain was a reckless sort to have done a slingshot maneuver from a rogue star, but this takes it to a whole nother level. "This is from the ambassador. The ship did an atmospheric skip maneuver and used an integrated human propulsion device to—" Fauve's face went from pale to blank. "Say what now?" she asked, and I picked up a stone from the ground. "They did this," I said, and launched the smooth round stone toward the water. It skipped along the surface until it bounced against an ancient boulder that I could see must have broken off from the stone above. According to the ambassador, the captain finished the slingshot maneuver by heading toward a planet. Normally you have to slow down in space and avoid centers of gravity. That should have slowed their arrival time somewhat. This one, though? I shook my head. Even thinking about it was dreadful. "They aimed for the atmosphere of some of your larger planets and skipped across the surface to slow down. It means they never had to make a slow maneuver until they were closing in on Earth. It's—" I could see Fauve still hadn't grasped the sense of danger involved in that kind of thing. Her head was cocked a little. "I kind of get it," she said, "but your sense of what is dangerous is kind of conservative, Bailey. So how dangerous is it really?" "That depends on the ship. You'd have to talk to your father. He'd know better than I. But just at a guess? From what little I remember of learning about those kinds of things, a nearly 3% chance that everybody dies." My tail bristled at the very idea of taking that kind of risk. Why would they do that? I couldn't imagine any reason why they might take a wild chance like that. 3%? That doesn't sound so bad, Fauve replied. "It is." I said, "From my perspective, it's insane. Optimal risk management reduces the chance of fatal incidents to 1% or less. Most captains won't do anything with even a 1.5 chance of serious damage, and they're considered the crazy ones if they'll do that much, let alone death in the void." "So could they be in trouble? Is that maybe why they took the risk if it's so bad?" Fauve asked, and started walking over the long dirt path that would take us out of the park. We walked through the stream of Cherokee Park. It was a wide thing, fairly flat at the crossing, but you'd still get your feet wet to go through it. The water was cool, crisp, and clean. A fish jumped from the deeper section and flopped its way over the stone to reach the other side. It wasn't a very large creature. It wiggled, flopped, and angled its way toward us. Fauve crouched down, grabbed its tail, and flung it in one smooth, bending motion of her hips, all the way toward the deep section where it landed with a little splash and vanished out of sight. It was a casual gesture on her part, a trivial kindness really, but the unthinking act had me marveling at the duality of human nature, reflexively responding to a creature's needs, and then moving on as if it never happened. Would I have done that if she hadn't? I asked myself that question more than once before we even reached the dry stone and moist ground on the other side. I doubted it. Acting for my human was one thing, I know her. Acting this way toward a stranger, or a random creature with no higher intelligence that is basically food? It was bizarre. Most of the time, Fauve seemed very Dlamisa-like to me. Pragmatic, logical, and relatively cautious. But in little moments I was reminded that she was still very much a human girl. A wide gulf existed between us that no amount of affection could ever truly cross. But I could still be impressed by that difference. Her question, though, rattled around in my head, and no matter how I thought about it, I just couldn't come up with anything. If the ship were damaged, remaining in place and calling for help from a human patrol would have made more sense. They were heavy in some areas, Humans had more manned vessels in space already than some species that had been traversing the void for centuries. It lent some credence in some quarters to the Zenti myth that humans were not a naturally occurring species, that humans seemed to love the idea of sailing through the deadly void of space. As much as I wanted to say I had an answer, I didn't. By the time we finished the walk home, I had typed out and sent an answer to the ambassador promising I would be there in hours. "No, none," I answered as we walked the last stretch toward the house in silence. "Just none. I guess I'll have to ask." "Can I come?" Fauve inquired. She batted her eyes up at me the way she did when she asked her parents for something. I was reminded of something I wrote in my first volume, "Cute can be weaponized," or something like that. And Fauve was a master at using it effectively. "Please? I won't get in the way. Plus it'd be neat to see one of those ships up close, and to meet the crew of a people who spend their lives in space. Who wouldn't want to do that? That's so cool!" She interlocked her fingers together and held her clasped hands against her chest. "Please? I'll be quiet while you do whatever, and I can take the hover bus back by myself." I had learned one other valuable trick on Earth. When dealing with a human child, putting the question off on the parents was always an effective strategy. "I don't mind." I genuinely didn't, but I couldn't be sure about how the others would respond, so I gently cautioned her. "If your parents don't mind, I don't. But I have no idea how the others will react to you. The ambassador and his staff are getting used to humans. But this crew has probably never seen one of your kind before today. If they want you to go home, you have to leave without complaint, okay?" Fauve gave an enthusiastic nod. "You're the best, Bailey. I promise I won't be any trouble." She gave me a sudden and impulsive hug that probably drenched her shirt, then ran inside ahead of me. Before I even caught the door, I heard her shouting, "Mom, Dad! Bailey says I can go see the ship come in if it's okay with you. The aliens are here early. Can I go?" Her enthusiasm was infectious beyond reason, and I went to get myself ready for what was no doubt going to be yet another unique experience.